Imagine waking up in a country where, all the standard markers of freedom are still there.
Elections, courts, newspapers.
Exactly. They exist, at least on paper, but they've quietly become nothing more than, well, stage props. Real power has shifted somewhere else.
And that slide, that collapse, it doesn't begin with tanks in the streets.
No, it begins with small choices made by ordinary people who just decide it's easier or maybe safer to go along.
That is the core warning from Yale historian Timothy Snyder in his book on Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century.
A really essential text.
Absolutely. He basically distilled the disasters of 20th century Europe, Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, into this urgent set of instructions for us today, for anyone who wants to defend democracy.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Our mission here is to pull out the most game-changing, the most actionable insights from On Tyranny.
The kind of wisdom that can really change how you think and act.
Right. And we're tackling that one big question. If these strong democracies collapsed back then, what on earth makes us think we're safe now?
Snyder starts with a lesson that's, it's deceptively simple. His first point is, do not obey in advance.
Which sounds like basic self-preservation, right? But he's saying that's the trap. So what's the actual historical mechanism he's talking about?
It's subtle. Tyrannies don't just grow because of orders from the top. They grow when citizens anticipate what those in power might want.
And they start self-censoring.
Exactly. They self-adjust before any law is passed or any threat is made. Journalists soften their criticism. Business leaders stay quiet on a bad policy.
To protect their careers, their market access.
Yeah. And in doing that, they are essentially teaching the rulers how much they can get away with.
Wow. So the victims are training the oppressors. That's a brutal observation.
It is. So for today, it means noticing where fear or just, careerism makes you cross your own lines.
Long before anyone is forcing you to.
Right. Staying quiet in a meeting, not sharing something online because you're worried what a future boss might think. That's a form of obeying in advance.
So if we stop censoring ourselves, we still need, I guess, a solid foundation to stand on. Which brings us to insight number 2. Defend institutions before they are hollow.
This is so important. He says institutions like courts, the media, universities, they don't protect democracy automatically.
They're not magic.
No. They only work if people, living people, defend their rules and norms in real time. Think about 1930s Europe. The courts and parliaments didn't just disappear overnight.
They were weakened from the inside.
They were packed, they were bypassed, intimidated, often under the cover of some supposed emergency.
So the practical lesson for you, the listener, is that it's about forcing the rules to matter in the moment. When a school board tries to fire a teacher for partisan reasons and that teacher fights it, that's defending the institution.
Yes, exactly. All of this, though, refusing to obey in advance, defending institutions, it all depends on one shared foundation.
And that is a shared grasp of reality, a belief in truth.
Snyder is really insistent on this. He says giving up on facts is giving up on freedom. Because if nothing is true, then all that's left is performance.
And raw power.
Right. You see this in 20th century propaganda, and you see it today. The hostility to verifiable facts, the constant repetition of obvious lies.
The creation of totally separate informational universes.
Yes. So the actionable habit here is simple but hard. Support independent journalism, check your sources, and resist that temptation to share something just because it makes the other side look bad.
Okay, so let's talk about getting away from the screen. Snyder has this great phrase for it, corporeal politics.
He argues that citizens who are atomized, who are just sitting behind their screens, are so much easier to monitor, to manipulate, and to frighten.
As opposed to organized communities.
Exactly. People who are physically present, attending a protest, a local city council meeting, a school board hearing, that embodied presence is just harder to ignore and harder to suppress.
It makes you ask yourself, what local space needs me to physically show up, not just sign an online petition?
Which brings us to his final, really stark lesson. If nobody is prepared to risk something for freedom, then eventually tyranny will claim everyone.
Courage and cowardice are both contagious.
That's the idea. He shows how historical turning points often came down to just a few people who refused to participate. They refused to go along with a lie or an act of violence.
And that created a moral precedent for others to follow.
So the practical step is to prepare now, to decide in advance what lines you personally will not cross, how you will respond if people in your community are threatened.
If these essential insights are resonating with you, you can move next into our full analysis, which maps all 20 of Snyder's lessons in more detail. Then there's the summary, and finally, our comprehensive critique.
And that really leaves us with a provocative question to think about. If most of your political life happens behind a screen, how easy are you to monitor and control? And what kinds of everyday, non-lethal risks might actually be necessary to keep democracy alive?
Discover genre-based book podcasts, analysis, and critiques at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.